Hi, folks. Welcome to Writing with Sandhya. Mia and I wish you a very happy 2022. Thank you so much for all your support in the past year. So, I have written an ode to you, all my viewers. You clapped, you cheered, you commented. Over 15 episodes, our ties have cemented. Fiction and non fiction nuances are described. You watched, you liked, and you subscribed. Then the chats with the authors, the meeting of the mind, your reception to those were equally kind. Speculative children humor, you liked them all. Much gratitude to the guests who graced the channel. Now, where do we go from here? You tell me. What should we listen to? What should we see? I'm listening, and I hope you keep watching. And Saturday Coffee Breaks continues to be our thing. So, thank you very much, and welcome to January. And as you might have guessed, the theme for this month is poetry. I was in Coorg for the winter break and it was beautiful there. I loved all the bird song. I think I'm trying to get the Malabar whistling thrush at the beginning of this episode. And I just used to wake up every morning just to listen to him. I was wondering what the theme for this month would be. And sitting in those lush green environs of Coorg, the answer came to me, it has to be poetry. I have been writing poems since I was 10 years old, just starting with, just rhymes. And after that, all those funny limericks. I used to enjoy all those nonsense limericks. Edward Lear is the king of nonsense limericks, and I enjoyed reading him. After that, I experimented with free verse, but all of that was intensely personal. So I write poetry when I'm unable to express myself any other way. And therefore, it turns out to be a very private experience for me, and I haven't published it anywhere since. Maybe in the college magazine and I think another magazine out there, but I haven't really tried publishing them. But in the last year, some of my poems have gotten published in anthologies. This beautiful book, Assorted Flowers, and there are some others, Out of the Blue, The Unspoken Words, and even a Hindi poem in Dil Ki Baat, and a very special one called A Safe and Brave Space from the Garden of Neuro, and that's a global anthology. And I'll probably share that in a later episode. So poems still hold their relevance. Maybe they're not published as much or read as much, but countries still have poet laureates. And there is a need, especially I think with all that's going on in the world, for us to reflect and get into our private space, think about things, feel things. So I think poetry will always hold its relevance. I've spoken a lot about prose in my initial episodes of this channel. So what's the difference between poetry and prose? Prose has short forms and longer forms, but poetry tends to be a very powerful and intense expression in a concentrated form. So relatively, it's much shorter. It could be a feeling, a thought, an event, or a description of something. So let's just talk a little bit about the basics of poetry. It can be rhyming or free verse. I started off as rhyming. Free verse is when it doesn't have rhymes, but still follows some kind of a structure. So what structure is that? It's typically in stanzas, or in prose as we call it, paragraphs. And it tends to have a meter. A meter is the cadence in which the form is written. So it could be the rhyming cadence. In limericks, as I said, it's A, A, B, B, A. So that means the first two words, sentences are rhyming, then the second two sentences, and the fifth one rhymes with the first two. So first, second, and fifth are rhyming, third and fourth are rhyming. A, A, B, B, A. Get that? And haiku is another place where the meter is expressed in syllables itself. So there are, the traditional form of haiku is, 575, 5 syllables in the first line, 7 in the second, and 5 again in the third. And of course, there are other, rules for haiku, and hopefully we can delve into that in one of a future episode over here. So that's a little bit about, just the structure of poetry. And now let's talk about the different types of poetry. We've already talked about rhyming, we've talked about free verse. There could be epics, and epics are huge, lengthy poems. In India, we have the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. In English, there's Homer's, the Odyssey and Iliad, very long pieces of poetry. Now, narrative poetry is similar to an epic, probably relatively shorter. It tells a story. So we have Henry Longfellow's The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And I remember reading this in school. I'm going to give a lot of references to school, I think, because I think that's when I read a lot of poetry. Unfortunately, after that, I haven't read so much of other people's poems. And I hope this month I'll do more of that. And I hope everyone does too. As I mentioned, I think that's the sustenance of the soul and the spirit and the heart. So we need poetry. Haiku, I already spoke about the form of haiku. And it's a narrative poem. It's a 3-line poem which originates in Japan. Matsuo Basho has written lots of poems, over 1,000. And I have written a couple of haiku in this book. This book is all about flowers, holds a record of sorts. And I have written about the sunflower and the lotus. So I'll read my poem on sunflower. Haiku. Should we write poems when the world is full of tears? The sunflower turns. Then we move on to sonnet. A sonnet has 14 lines. It's usually about love. If anyone has read Shakespeare, you've read a lot of sonnets over there. So there are typically 2 kinds of sonnets, with the Shakespearean one and the Petrarchan one. An ode is a dedication to a tribute to a person or a thing. I started off with an ode to all of you. So that's an example of an ode. The most famous one is John Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn. You can write an ode on just about anything. You can write an ode on your pets, even on the trash can. So go ahead and try that. That would be a fun poetic exercise to do. A ballad is a narrative verse. It can be poetical and it tends to be musical. It's often sung in ancient days. I remember, again, back in school, reading about young Lochinvar who rode in from the west. And all of the poets have tried out this form of storytelling. And lastly, villanelle. It's a very old form of French poetry. It's a 19-line poem. It's a very strict structure with 5 tercets and a quatrain. And even the internal rhyme is very specified. There is a refrain. There's a very famous one by Dylan Thomas called Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. I also tried this out and I've published it in one of my books. I can't seem to find it. So when I find my book, maybe I'll read it out later. So that's about all the traditional forms of verse. Modern, there are lots of different ways. It tends to be free verse these days, but there's also something called slam poetry, which is more of a performance where it's not just about the words, but you also, read out the poems at an event. And Rupi Kaur has, popularized this, very famous all over the world. And she also posts on Instagram a lot of her small pieces of Insta poetry. I grew up in Lucknow, so I've read a lot of Hindi poets. I remember Harivansh Rai Bachchan, of course, and names like Suryakant Tripathi Nirala, Maithili Sharan Gupt, and so many others. And of course, being in Lucknow, also Urdu Shairi. I unfortunately don't understand so much of it, but it sounds beautiful to the ears, and I would love to understand more. Famous shairs are Amir Khusro, Mirza Ghalib, and of course Javed Akhtar in modern days. So who doesn't know Rabindranath Tagore, Bengali poet, and also in English, and it's often set to music. His poems which are set to music in Bengali are also called Rabindra Sangeet, and one of my favorite authors and poets. I'm a Tamilian, so we have Tirukural, which is an ancient classic Tamil language text. It has 1,330 verses of 7 words each called Kural. It was written by Thiruvalluvar and in the 5th century and still lasts through this day. So that's just a little bit of an introduction to poetry, and the rest of the month I hope to meet poets and get them to you and understand how they write, and also about they can read out their poems to you. So what kind of poetry do you like to read or to write? And if you're from any other state or country, are there famous poets and poems in your language other than English? So do share, do comment, and subscribe below. There's that little matter of a bell icon also, I believe. So with that, wish you a very happy 22 and see you in the next episode.